it comes up.
This meeting is being recorded.
So in case anybody was wondering, it's going to be recorded. Well, you know what I want to do. Make sure that I stay on me.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right. So in Out of the Matrix, I'm going to erase this corner. In Out of the Matrix, we talk about Friday night. We talk about us being limitless, right? Which seems sort of ridiculous when we think about our lives and how we show up. We don't show up as limitless beings at all. And we talk in the weekend about this idea of removing limits. And if you keep removing limits, you'll get to the limitless reality. So one of the ways to think about this is something that we've talked about, which is big R reality versus small R reality. So big R reality, in Out of the Matrix terms, would be our limitless reality. Our small R reality would be our limited reality, or the limits that we place on ourselves. Our limited reality, our small R reality. And I have the big R reality up there and small R reality down here. Okay. And so one of the things, I'm going to dip into some other ideas, but you guys, anybody not remember the story of the Magic King?
I'll refresh our memories again.
Yeah. So the Magic King is the idea that as a limitless being, you're limitless. You can do whatever you want. So as a limitless being, the Magic King is a limitless being, and he lives in a world by himself, and he decides to create some toys to play with, and that's fine. But then he gets a little bored, so he decides to create some people to play with. So he creates people to play with, but the people are always sort of deferring to him, so he decides to give them free will. So he gives them free will. So now he's got these people that have free will, but they still all defer to him as the king. And so he decides to make all the people forget that he's the king, so they'll treat him like everybody else. And that's fine. But then the next step is he wants to experience what it's like to be the people. So he goes out and he disguises himself and goes out and hangs out with the people. But the only problem with that is that he still knows that he's the king. So now he decides to forget that he's the king. So that's what we did. We decided to forget because we wanted to experience this limited reality. We wanted to experience what's it like to be limited. And the only way to do that truly was to forget that we're limitless. Because if we go into this and remember that we're limitless, we're not really experiencing limit. Does that make sense?
Yep.
As a story. So we designed this little story to sort of fool ourselves. Now, a couple of things happened when we did that. As a limitless being, we're able to recognize the connection between everybody and everything. So as the Magic King, when he first created the people, he realized the people were part of him. He's the one who created them. So he's connected to all of them, and he understands what's going on for all of them. And that was part of one of the reasons he had to forget that reality, because he wanted to experience this limitless piece. But when he became limited, he forgot about the connection, and he started to experience separation. What's it like to be separate? I don't see all these people as connected to me because I created them. I actually see them as separate beings. They're all separate from me. So when I see them as separate, when I'm all connected to them, there's no fear. Okay, there's no guilt. There's only union. And let's just say love, for lack of a better description, because one of the things that the Magic King built into his experience in the small R reality to make him remember his limitless reality is the experience of love. Okay, unconditional love. So he knew when he was going into this endeavor of forgetting who he really was, that he had to put some reminders in. And love was one of the reminders that he put in for himself. So that's one of the ways that we reflect on our connection with our limitless reality is through the experience of love. And this doesn't necessarily mean romantic love, although romantic love can be connected to that. This is unconditional love. In other words, love without judgment, which is a dicey idea because we're such judging beings. We judge all the time. But the less judgment we have, the more love we can have. But there was no fear, no guilt in union. There was only love. And then down here, there was limited experience of love, and we saw ourselves as separate from everyone else, which generated fear. Okay? So we became afraid because we saw ourselves as separate. and we needed to protect ourselves because everyone else is out there and they're not connected to me. I don't know who they are, and I have to protect myself from them and make sure that I'm safe. So in that process, we created the ego. And the ego is a representation of this idea that I must defend myself, which was an aspect of this creation that we came up with, this idea of small R reality or limits and separation. We created the ego, and we used the ego as sort of our defender. And so our ego speaks to us all the time about being careful around other people, watching other people, judging other people, putting other people down, raising ourselves up, seeing ourselves as better than others. It's really all about judgment. The ego is big into judgment. So ego is equated with judgment. Okay, so when you're in judgment, you're in your ego. And this is why we work to not judge. We do our whole section on behavior cycles, and we work on this idea of not judging others, not judging situations, and letting go of that judgment, because that's releasing the ego. And the ego fights that. The ego tells you all the time that you should be judging. Well, one of the reasons we do that is because we want to get back to love. We want to experience our limitless reality and get back to love. So one of the reasons that we put the limits in place, one of the reasons we put the limits in place was so that we could experience this small R reality, okay? And then the limits were created in part because we needed to protect ourselves and defend ourselves from other people. So that's a lot of information just to start with. Any questions about that? Comments about it? Any ahas from it? I got to admit somebody else here. Neville, that all fits for you?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So one of the ways that we work to get back to our limitless reality is by identifying the limits that we have placed on ourselves. Okay. And so one of those is the beliefs that we have. And again, for all of these things, whether it's judgments or beliefs, we put them on a scale from 1 to 10, and we work to reduce the number. In other words, it's unrealistic for us to expect to not judge anymore at all right away anyways. That's what we're shooting for, but what we're really working at is reducing the number of our judgments. So if we're really extremely judgmental at an 8, 9, or a 10, we want to become less and less judgmental. And one of the ways we do that is by reducing the number of our beliefs. So do you guys have an idea of one of the ways in our out of the matrix technology that we teach to reduce your judgment? How do you reduce your judgment of the world and the people in it?
Remind ourselves that we're supposed to be interdirected.
Sure, yeah, one of the ways is by being interdirected, right? So that's
Part of it's,
one of the keys, but go ahead, Neville.
well, I mean, just stop judging them. And realize, for me, it's right. It's kind of like that, the mirror analogy. You're just reflecting it back to me.
Yeah.
It's actually not about them. It's about me.
Yeah, so what are you saying? You're saying that one of the ways I reduce how much I judge others is reducing what?
Well, it's for me. It's just realizing it's nothing about them. It's my stuff.
Yeah.
And so I take ownership of it. Ultimately, so they're off the hook because it has nothing to do with them.
So what Neville
my
is
stuff.
what Neville is saying is we have to reduce the judgment we have about ourselves.
Yeah, pretty
So
much.
the less judgment I have about myself, the less judgment I will have about others.
Yeah, it's amazing how that works.
Yeah, isn't that fine? Yeah.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, one of the things we talk about in the weekend is projection from the subconscious mind. And we have this weird understanding in humanity that somehow I'm going to project my stuff onto someone else, and then it's going to be less in me. In other words, I'm going to judge them as less than, I'm going to be angry at them, I'm going to be upset with them, and we somehow believe that's going to get rid of our upset. And based on what we're saying is that doesn't work. In other words, when I'm judgmental of them, I'm maintaining the judgment that I have about myself, and it's all going to stay at a high number. The only way out of this conundrum is to recognize that the judgment I have about other people, exactly what Neville's saying, the judgment I have about other people is just strictly a reflection of the judgment that I have about myself. Now that's, for you guys who've all taken out of the matrix and worked on this for a while, that makes perfectly good sense, and it's a valuable idea, and we work on it all the time. For most people, that's outrageous. I mean, we have to understand that for most people, the idea that somehow the judgment I have about them is really a judgment that I have about myself that I'm projecting is an outrageous idea in the world. And
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, is there a difference between observing and judging? Like over the weekend, I'm observing the fact that Adam's sister is very anxious. I'm wondering why. That's not necessarily a judgment, or
Correct.
is it?
Yeah, so you can observe something without judging it, 100%, and that's what we would ask that people do. One of the things that we used to always say, and I think Bruce is the one who first said this, but I'm not sure, is, isn't that interesting? Which is, I'm just noticing it and I'm interested in it. I'm not judging it as good. I'm not judging it as bad. That's what we usually do. We usually we're usually pretty simple about it. We have two categories, good or bad, and we throw it in one, either the good side or the bad side. It's good or it's bad. And both of those are judgments. Okay, so yes, so does that answer your question, Jessica?
Yeah.
Yeah, you absolutely can observe things without judging them. Now, typically, depending on the level of judgment we have, even when we're observing, there's some judgment, but we get better at it over time. So we start to observe people with less and less judgment over time, okay? If you're working this process and understanding what's going on. So the problem is when we do conscious and subconscious is that consciously, the mind wants to project, subconsciously, the mind wants to project its pain, okay? And so we project it out consciously because the subconscious mind is driving the bus. So we have to try and get the conscious mind to override the subconscious mind. And one of the ways we do that is by consciously being aware of this process. And so if you don't realize that this process is, that's why one of the reasons it's valuable to have this schematic and understand what's happening here. When you understand what's happening, then you can make a choice, a different kind of a choice. When you don't understand that this is what's going on, that I'm projecting my judgment, then you can't make a different choice. And that's what I'm saying about most people in the world are projecting their subconscious stuff. They're judging other people and they don't realize what exactly is happening. And when you don't know what's happening, you can't do anything about it. That's why it's so important that we contact this subconscious stuff. And that's why we go through the worksheets and get in touch with those things. And that's why we try and ask questions about it. And hopefully your mentor in the weekend, hopefully Tony, hopefully me, does it with as little judgment as possible. We just start to ask questions about what it is that you're upset about, rather than judge it as good or bad, wrong or right. And so one of the slides that we have in the weekend is, we want you to understand that your upsets are not bad. There's nothing wrong with being an upset. What we say is understand the upset and what the core of it is and what it's really about. And you can reduce the intensity of it, the frequency of it, the amount of it in your life, if you can understand what's going on. But again, most people are, Lisa said this earlier, most people are outer directed, okay? In other words, they're blaming everything outside of them for what they're upset about. And that's projection. And that's why it's so important to become inner directed so that you can work this process. You have to become inner directed to get this done, okay? So questions, comments, concerns about that? I don't know if that.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Chris,
Yes.
I have grown into being very observant and very curious.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious about understanding what upsets me.
Yes.
And I'm curious observing why some things all of a sudden trigger me to be completely stunned. And the curiosity is what is the basis of all that. I'm curious about what's going on inside of me. I'm curious, why is this triggering me? I'm curious, why am I thinking about that? But I can seldom identify something as good or bad. It's just, what is it?
Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful way to look at it. Observe it and try and understand it and be curious about it. Those are all great ways to look at it. I will say that if something's upsetting you, then you have a judgment about something. So, but that's what you're being curious about, what it is that I'm having a judgment about.
Yeah, but I'm failing to find that.
Oh, I see.
That's my,
You're having a hard time finding what it is.
yeah, I am.
Yeah. So in our process, we use worksheets. So, we go through, because what we would say in our weekend is we would say it's always, so as Lydia is describing that, we would say it's always some belief that's driving us. Remember what Tony says, which is, what must I be believing about myself that would leave me feeling this way? And so as we get curious about it, we start to decide, what belief am I having about myself that is causing this upset? So Lydia, can you give me an event that occurred that you're describing, that you're having?
Well, I have a friend that I told him how to turn off the AC in my house. It's only one button, but the AC panel has 5 different buttons. So I painted the button to turn it off red because he touched every single button and messed up the whole AC. And I had to find an engineer to come and fix it. And every time he comes and messes up I started getting all upset. I said, why am I getting so upset about a stupid AC turn on? But it's been over a year and he still cannot get the button that I turned red, just touch it twice. How is that?
Yeah.
Chris, is mind-boggling to me.
So the mind-boggling part is the fact that he can't get that, and the mind-boggling part is that it keeps upsetting you? Both things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Both.
So when you're curious about that, what have you discovered? Anything? Like, have you gotten to any kind of a belief for you?
Perhaps I'm too demanding, but
It doesn't sound
after
like.
1 year telling him the same thing, I am really puzzled. What is it in me that is creating this?
Okay, so what's the judgment that you have about him? He must be, if he can't,
Stupid.
yeah, stupid, yeah. So I would imagine that that's what's going on for you. If
Yeah.
if somehow I'm upset because I see someone else as stupid, then on some level that registers inside of me. So that's pushing my button in terms of, like, I try and have everything organized and set up for this guy, and so it's very simple for him, and he can't do it. And what's wrong with him? He must be stupid. And again, that wouldn't upset me. And one of the other ways we say this is, you can't be upset about something unless you think it means something about you. And oftentimes, since we're projecting our stuff, if I'm projecting stuff from my subconscious mind onto him and I'm calling him stupid, then there must be some resonance with that with me, some stupid resonance with me. So I don't know if that fits for you at all.
I have to look into that because it's mind-boggling to me.
Okay.
He said that he had some neurological problems. His mind doesn't work as it used to, and he cannot connect information with action.
Gotcha.
But after a year and 2 months of telling him exactly the same thing over and over again, I said, but one day you ought to know that.
Yeah. So, and the other question I would have is, why do you keep having this guy do this?
Good question. Good question, because I feel that someday he'll learn.
It could be that
You feel like it's something he can learn?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question, Chris. I haven't thought of that.
I mean, after 2 or 3 times, I would ask him not to do it, and I would get somebody else.
Yeah, exactly.
So the fact that,
Yeah.
that you
But
keep,
I'm doing it myself because I got fed up of telling him the same thing.
yeah, but you're sort of asking the same guy to do the same thing differently every time, and so you're driving yourself crazy with this. So yeah, there's a lot to dig in on. So think about that a little bit as we go on, and I would encourage you also to do a worksheet and get to a belief about it. But Somebody else was going to comment.
I just said that she thinks that, it's triggering her, he must be stupid, which reflects on I must be stupid,
Right.
which means maybe you're frustrated because you can't figure out a way to show him how to do it correctly. I mean, even if you know he has issues and has troubles, somehow inside you might be thinking I must be able to show him how to do this correctly. If I can't figure out how to show him, so I must be stupid. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? It's
That's very
like you're
true.
getting frustrated because you can't figure out a way to teach him how to do it. So that starts to make you feel stupid because you can't figure it out.
Yeah, but I mean, it's
So-
a great story if you guys think about that. Like, again, if you're judging someone else as stupid, now, so how do we do that? So this guy's having these mistakes, and it might be the fact that he's not very intelligent, or as he said, he's not able to make some connections neurologically, and that's fine. But do you get that stupid is a judgment versus understanding that this guy, the other way to do that is an observation is, this guy's not capable of doing that. I don't know why, and it doesn't matter. I'm going to get someone else. I don't have to judge him as stupid. Does that make sense? And so one of the stories that I tell is, I had a student who came into our program who called everything retarded. Like all constantly used the word retarded, which told me I'm retarded in his subconscious mind. That was what was rolling around in there. And then over time that he was in our program, things got better for him. His life improved and he stopped using that word. And no one ever pointed it out to him. No one ever said that you say that all the time or that you should stop saying that. He just stopped using that word as he progressed. So what happened was his number went down. His I'm retarded number got lower to the point where he stopped saying it as much. So that's just that's a really stark example. Most of us don't go around doing that. Like I'm sure Lydia doesn't go around calling people stupid all the time. But on some level, there's something going on there with that. Okay. So Lydia mentioned the idea of being curious about what's going on. Oh, and the problem is we get curious about what's going on and then we start to judge ourselves for what's happening. So be sure, Lydia, that you're not judging yourself. Like you said, you're being curious, like, isn't this interesting that I can't get over this upset and I keep making these same mistakes? You know, what belief is it that's driving that? Because again, what must I be believing about myself that would cause me to feel this way? Because I can't be upset unless I think it means something about me. Okay. So, yeah, anybody else have any other stories like that they can relate to this?
I have a comment. It's just interesting because when people do make judgments, they come across as like they're better than that person versus really the misbelief is that you're actually stupid as well.
Yes. Yeah. And
right.
what people come across as I'm better than you, what their false belief probably is that I'm less than.
Right.
Right. So that's sort of the way it works. And so not that, and Lydia's not on a level that she would do this, but some people, if they think someone else is stupid, or I'm sorry, if they feel like they're stupid in their subconscious mind, they might try and make other people feel stupid about themselves. And so it depends sort of on the level. Like here, Lydia's trying to figure it out and understand what's going on, and that's fine. But someone else would just, if they had a stupid belief, they would go around trying to make other people feel stupid. It's just like someone who feels less than would try and make other people feel less than.
Okay.
So, so what's another way that someone who has an I'm stupid belief, and again, by the way, Lydia, I'm not saying that's what the belief is for you, but that's, that's just a possibility. But someone who has a stupid belief might try and make other people feel stupid. What else makes someone with a stupid belief do? It's the total opposite of that.
Act smart or do things that make people think that they're intelligent, like overachievers.
Yeah, they might try and really become a really good educator and make and really help other people be smart and really work on all those kind of try and helping other people with their intelligence and their work and some of those kind of things. And so people can be driven to make other people feel stupid, but they can also be driven to make other people smart or help them recognize it. So if I go around and it's like, I'm constantly trying to tell people who are doing well, for lack of a better description, stupid things in their lives and try and tell them that they're not stupid, trying to affirm to them that they're not, and tell them you're so smart, you really know what's going on. It's possible that, you know, I have the I'm stupid belief, and I can't stand it when I see someone else who's acting out my false belief. So I try and change their behavior so that I can feel better about me. And that's that inner directed, outer directed piece. Does that make sense? So
Yeah, it's very interesting to think about. And it could be something just more broad as like, I'm not good enough. So it's everyone else has XYZ issue. Something that comes up a lot for me is when people get really stressed. It stresses me out. Like I said this week.
yeah.
So what is that?
Yeah,
Nice
you know, hard to know specifically, because generally stress is sort of a general term. So I need to know more about like what the stress is.
I think when people worry too much about every little thing and get so anxious about stupid things that don't matter. But
Yeah.
I find that I think I do that more than I want to admit to. Like
Okay.
I'm constantly in my head, you know, worrying about everything and how to, I mean, a big one for me is I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
So I'm always a lot of pressure on me to push myself and be the best me.
Yeah, gotcha. That's great, Jessica. That's exactly right. So someone who's not good enough. So you know, if you go to Jessica's apartment, it's very neat and clean. Jessica works out regularly. She takes really good care of herself. And you can sort of see that someone who maybe has a not good enough is doing those things. And not that those things, there's anything wrong with those things or they're bad, but when they're when you're unaware of what's going on and you're doing that, that's the problem. Jessica's aware, and that's great. Because you normally expect someone with a not good enough belief to show up with a messy house, unorganized, out of shape, all those kind of things. So again, we can't know what's going on necessarily in someone's subconscious mind based on, you know, what generally you would expect them to show up. So again, someone with an I'm stupid belief could have 5 PhDs, as we know from our story from the weekend, right? Or someone who's stupid could, you know, they have dropped out of high school, or not that they're stupid, believe that they're stupid, could have dropped out of high school, you know, lost jobs, had what looks like a typically stupid life. But someone can be driven to try and look as good as possible because they're sort of trying to outrun this thing. But if you're aware of that and you know that, then you just observe the fact that, oh, okay, so, you know, nothing wrong. And again, I often say to people, if someone came to me and their life looked really clean, neat, and organized, and they found out they had a not good enough belief, I'm not telling them to be messy. Like, that's not the idea. It has nothing to do with what you're doing in a little form. Just sort of acknowledge that maybe that's what's part of this. Just like we're asking Lydia to say, maybe I'm stupid is part of why she's having this upset and she can't let it go. Okay. So I don't know if that sparked anything else if you guys, based on this discussion, can come up with other times that you projected stuff. I'll tell you what my experience was the last couple of days. I got a new student this year who, using some very judgmental terminology here, he's a pain in the ass. He was at the high school last year and they couldn't handle him. He was very difficult, got write-ups in the high school 30 times last year. Which is essentially 1 a week. He got written up and sent to the office. So he's in my program. And, you know, it's been challenging for me because it bothers me and it upsets me. And one of the things that comes up is I feel powerless. And so today I spent the day sort of scribbling in a notebook on the side and running it through my head that I love him. And so that was sort of trying to offset this struggle that I'm having where I think he's a pain in the ass. And so I'm trying to go to this idea that, look, he's me. He and I are one, we're connected. And when so I'm gonna let the Harley Davidson drive by. So I'm sort of trying to acknowledge, I'm acknowledging this idea that any judgment I have of him is just a projection from me. And so instead I'm trying to do what Course in Miracles would say, which is extend love to him. So I'm working to not judge him and instead, you know, acknowledge that I love him, that I'm connected to him. And it certainly brought me more peace, seemed to shift things in the room a little bit. And the second part of the day went a little bit better, which was good. But I need to get on that mantra on a regular basis with him. I need to have that running through my head when he's instigating things or trying to annoy me, which he does purposely quite regularly for the teachers and some of the other students. I need to have that mantra that I love you, I love him, he is me, I'm connected to him, all those kind of things. And then I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how that'll change how I interact with him or how he interacts with me, but I'm sure that it will in the long term. And if nothing else, it would leave me feeling better. I will feel calmer and better about what's going on, whether it changes the circumstances or not. So that's sort of been my experience of being aware of, this is bothering me. I know it's a projection from me. So how can I deal with that differently rather than projecting? So I'm
Do you ever, like, in the moment though, like I told you this morning, I was very anxious and I
Yeah.
couldn't get out of bed as much as I was trying to, and like
Mhm.
calm myself down, say I am this, I am that, and positive terms. But like then if you let it go and you distract yourself and then you come back to it later in the day or later whenever, and
Yeah.
that goes for many things, you can be a lot more accepting and patient with yourself.
Yeah.
Versus
Nothing.
sometimes it's so hard to do when you're so hyped up.
Yeah, Jessica's making a great point, which is this. So we would think that distraction is bad. In other words, I need to confront this directly, this belief and some of those kind of things. But sometimes a distraction is okay if you're doing it consciously. In other words, I'm driving myself a little crazy here with my mind thinking about these things. I need to go do something, listen to a song, watch a TV show, go for a walk, cook a meal, do some yoga, go talk to a friend, go for a hike, whatever it is, to do something to distract myself from this. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes we need to do that. So don't judge yourself if you have to have a distraction. Now, all those things I described are sort of conscious distractions that I'm using that are relatively healthy. Unconscious distractions are overeating, overdoing things, overeating, drinking, over anything where I'm doing it is out of a subconscious piece when I'm overdoing it. But when I'm being conscious with my distraction, I'm choosing to do something that just occupies my mind for a while and gets me off of the thought that's difficult for me or the person that's difficult for me. That's okay as long as we're doing it in a conscious way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then the other piece that we built into this whole story, you guys have heard me describe this before, is the line of pain, PAIN, in your conscious mind and your subconscious mind. So on this side is the conscious thinking, on this side is the subconscious false beliefs, FB, not Facebook, false belief. And so when our conscious mind gets close to that false belief, pain comes up and we're wired to avoid pain. So we avoid that situation. So normally we do need to at some point get through that pain and experience whatever it is to get to the false belief so we can identify it, bring it over to our conscious side and decide that it's not true and release it, okay? So that's one of the other pieces that we built into this process. Remember, we're experiencing separation, we're experiencing fear, we need to protect ourselves from other people. That's what our ego tells us it's helpful for. It tells us it's there for us to keep us safe. I'm going to keep you safe by judging all these other people. I'm going to defend you by judging all these other people. And that's why when we're consciously undoing that process, we're consciously undoing the ego's hold on our mind, okay? But one of the processes that got built in was this whole idea of experiencing pain is difficult, so we don't really want to experience it. And I bring that up because that whole idea of distraction, if it's, again, an unconscious distraction, it can be to avoid this pain. When it's a conscious distraction, then we can come back to, as Jessica said, later in the day, we can come back to the thought, the idea, whatever it is, talk to someone who's valuable, who can help with it. So does that raise any questions for anybody?
Yeah. How do you feel about physical pain?
Oh boy. Like, oh, somebody else is joining us. Amber Albergotti. I don't know who that is. Hang on. Yeah, so physical pain is similar in the sense that, remember, the story is that we're a limitless being. So even our physical reality or our physical pain is something that we've created or experienced. So,
Wait,
what's that?
say that one more time.
So again, remember that we're a limitless being. So even the physical pain that we're experiencing, on some level, we've created it. Okay, so if we've created, we can uncreate it. Now that's sort of unfair. I don't want people to think, oh, well, Chris is saying that I shouldn't be feeling this pain. I should be able to think my way out of this pain. But we also know that all those stories that we do about the power of your mind, where the guy who had cancer grew his tumors and then shrunk them and then essentially killed himself. The milkshake story, where people raised their ghrelin and lowered their ghrelin and they all had the same kind of shake. All those kind of stories tell us that we are having an effect on our physical body with our mind, with our thinking. That's why the multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical industry does double-blind experiments, because they realize that the human mind has an effect on how people feel. So that's sort of my thoughts about that. But again, I think it's driven by how strong your belief is. In other words, if I feel not good enough and it's a 10, I'm probably going to have a lot more physical stuff going on than if my false belief is a 5. So that's why we work on lowering the false belief. And I think one of the things that happens, Jessica, is our ego or our separated self hears this information about the physical pain, and then we judge ourselves for not being able to get rid of our physical pain. When instead we should just keep working on that process of limiting or lowering the false belief. And that's what will help with the physical pain. It's a slower process. But again, like with my arm tremor that I have, the whole diagnosis of Parkinson's and all that kind of stuff, I was very much aware that today it was quite limited in my experience of it. And I'm very clear that it was because I was focusing on love so much, the idea of love and projecting it out, extending it. So.
Okay.
Other thoughts from it? So I don't know if anybody else can come up with a story where you now recognize, oh yeah, I've been projecting something onto somebody else, and maybe even have an idea of what it is. Maggie, you usually have a good story for this kind of stuff.
Well, I was thinking of my grievance because of the nurse who never worked. I mean, I looked at her and judged her because she's there to work and she wasn't. And we were all working really hard and she wouldn't even answer a call bell, you know? So I was, as you were going through the process with the other lady, I was thinking, okay, so is there a part of me that is lazy? Because it's hard for me to identify with that.
Yeah.
Although there,
Go ahead.
you know, there's what I can identify with is the feeling that like she's getting away with this and I'm working so hard and not being recognized for it. So I think there's that thing of not being good enough and overcompensating. I think I must have gotten affection or positive strokes for doing things in my home, in my, like either being a good listener to somebody or whatever, doing something, because doing what is a big thing, you know, in my life. Like if I'm not doing something, I'm not, I'm getting better with that, by the way, like allowing myself to not do and just be, but you know, I would beat myself up for if I just read all day or, you know.
So I hope you guys are getting what Maggie's saying. So in other words, she got a lot of positive reinforcement, and in her own mind, she gives herself a lot of positive reinforcements for doing things and getting things done. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. Like we get things done, we feel good, that's okay. But what she's saying is she sort of sees the reflection of that judgment that she had about this other woman because she wasn't doing things. So that's the comment on one level. On another level, it makes perfectly good sense that if you have a coworker who's not pulling up their end, that we're not saying you have to tolerate that. We're not saying, oh yeah, well, you just have to let that go and be okay with it. We're not saying that. Like, what I would say is work to not be emotionally upset about it, but it doesn't mean you can't do something about it, which is, whatever the appropriate steps would be, talking to a supervisor.
But that was the problem. She was very close to the nurse manager, and the nurse manager just said, people do things differently.
Yeah, right.
That was, and I've had many head nurses that have been that way with their friends. They've let their friends get away with, coming into work late, not clocking in, and getting paid for the full, that kind of thing. So there's some theme about fairness or something. And I feel like the other lady, where it's like it gets murky for me. Like, I don't, like, what is it? What is the underlying?
Because on a common sense level, it makes sense that you're upset by that. I mean, like, anybody would say you should be. Just like when my student is acting like a knucklehead in the class, anyone who observes that situation would say, yeah, Chris should be annoyed by that. Okay. But,
right.
And I know you're not working anymore, but one of the choices we can make in those situations is love. So in other words, like with my student, what I'm doing is I get that his behavior is quote unacceptable, as this nurse's behavior was quote unacceptable based on the world's standards and the work standards. But at the moment that kid's in my class, at the moment that you're working with that nurse, and the typical avenue of trying to remove this student isn't going to work for reasons that I won't get into. And you weren't able to do anything about that nurse. So that's when you step back on love, and you don't know what will happen. Like, that sounds crazy, but when you start to extend love to these situations and to these people, in other words, having that mantra of I love you, we're connected, we're all one, some of those kind of things, it will shift how you see it, how you experience it. It will shift the energy around the situation. And I can't say what will happen differently, but remember Ho'oponopono. He was in a criminally insane hospital ward, and all those people started to feel better about themselves because of the process that he was going through. So that's one of the other places that you can go. And sometimes, guys, when you get to a situation that looks untenable, in other words, it feels like there's nothing else I can do. The reason you're presented with that is so that you will have to turn to love. There's no other, nothing else seems to work. So I've got to turn to this. So he's doing me a favor in that class, because any other technique that I used, this kid's been in school for 10 years now. He's never behaved himself. He's been an issue for everybody. And I'm not going to reinvent the wheel and come up with some new technique in the classroom that's going to get this kid under control. But this, I guarantee you, will have some effect. And I don't know what that effect will be. And so sometimes those situations, again, that we get into that are untenable, and we feel like I'm just absolutely frustrated, I don't know what else to do. That's an opportunity to say, my only other choice here is to extend love to the situation, to the person. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And again, it's it's very counterintuitive to this process, this ego, this separation process, the idea of extending love. But again, when you get in untenable situations, I really think that's an opportunity to do this. So does that make sense, Maggie?
Yes.
So by the way, it's one level for us to be over here working on the false belief. And what Maggie's saying is she's having a hard time understanding or figuring out, what false belief is going on for me when this person is clearly being inappropriate and it bothers me. And so that's okay. I can't quite figure out exactly. And I tell you, for the most part, I've given up on figuring out what my false belief is in any particular situation. I got lots of false beliefs. They're going on all the time. And so when I'm upset, I know it's one of those. And that's where I start to lean towards love or my inner guide, or ask for help or pray or something like that, versus going through this process. This process of figuring things out is valuable. But at some point, you have to set that aside and start to do some of these things, some of these loving, inner guided kind of things with people. Okay. So does that make sense, Maggie, in terms of an option? So if-
Yes, and I did sort of do that with her and other situations where it's like there doesn't seem to be a solution. So I do the I'm sorry, please forgive me.
Yeah.
I love you, thank you.
Yeah, and
And-
so, well, but one of the reasons we work this process over here, which is the subconscious process of identifying, or the conscious process of identifying our false beliefs and releasing them, is because when the false belief is an 8, 9, or a 10, it's very hard to choose love. So that's why we first start with identifying the false belief, reducing the number of the false belief, feeling better about ourselves so we can make the choice for love. But it's very hard to make the choice for love when that false belief is really strong. And that, again, that's why we start with this process before we can probably choose to extend love. So that's why sometimes somebody who's early in the weekend or someone who's just learning this information, you know, some of you don't know, one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm teaching classes at a rehab on the weekends. So these guys are recent, it's on a men's rehab. These guys are recently sober. And so the opportunity for them to extend love, they'll understand the idea, but because they're feeling so crappy about themselves, it will probably be hard for them to do actively for a while until they, again, reduce their number. Does that make sense? Got just a couple minutes left. Any questions, comments?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
So I find it really important to remember that there's no private thoughts.
Okay. Yeah, so
And
we're all connected.
yeah, I mean, it's easy to get in touch with your emotion when you're pissed. And, you know, but looking at my thoughts and journaling them, because obviously if I've got a grievance with somebody, they know my thoughts even before they act out.
Yeah.
So I find myself creating the paradoxical intent, creating what I don't want because of my judgments and thoughts. Now, I want to blame them for my emotion and my triggering, but it really starts with thought, and there's no private thoughts. And a lot of times journaling the story and my thoughts about the person can bring me down to the next layer, which is the misbeliefs, you know. So I think it's important not to sidestep the thoughts that we have about the person, because we're having them before they're acting out.
Yeah, fair enough.
We think at first, and then they show up lazy.
Yeah.
You know, we want to say they're lazy and it's pissing me off. Well, no, there's no private thoughts. We are creating the whole thing by our thoughts.
Yeah. So
of course, it's coming from our misbeliefs and it's causing emotions, but there's a lot to looking at our private thoughts and seeing that other people are at some level are aware of what we're thinking and they're acting on those thoughts.
yeah.
So I just wanted to thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so what Cindy's sort of talking about, it might be a little hard for us to realize that there are no private thoughts. I agree with what Cindy's saying. Sometimes that's a hard concept. She's been doing this for a really long time and doing A Course in Miracles, so that's where she's coming from with that. But for those of you who might have a hard time realizing that there's aren't no private thoughts, one of the ways to think about this is energetically. In other words, you might not believe or be connected to the idea that you don't have any private thoughts. In other words, everyone else is sharing your thoughts. But energetically, you can experience when you're judgmental of someone else, there's an energy exchange between you and that other person when you're judgmental. So maybe you can't go to the thought level, but it's easier for us to connect to energetically. When I am judgmental with my thoughts about someone else, they're picking up on that energy. Okay. And so for my student, as I shift from judging him as a knucklehead or a pain in the ass to instead being a brother or a connected being to me, and I need to love him, you know, that will shift the energy between us. Right now, he feels like he's sort of treating me like he's treated every other teacher, which is they're out to get me. So today I tried to talk to him one point. He said, I didn't do anything wrong. I was like, I'm not talking about anything you wanted to do wrong. I wanted to help you. But he wouldn't listen to me because he was sure that I wanted to go after him about something. So keep that in mind. When you shift your energy about what's going on, the other person experiences that very directly. And you can take that if you're comfortable, you can take that to the level that Cindy's talking about, which is You know, there are no private thoughts. My thoughts are their thoughts are my thoughts. And one last thought, and we sort of have seen this and talked about this, which is, you know, probably the people that are pushing our buttons have similar beliefs to us. So if my not good enough button is being pushed, it's probably the same belief that the other person has in their subconscious mind. If my I'm lazy belief is being pushed, it's probably their lazy belief as well. Probably, not always. And sometimes there can be a subtle difference between, like say, I'm not good enough and I'm stupid. Those are sort of similar beliefs, right? Stupid's maybe a little more particular, a little more specifically not good enough. So any last questions about all this? It's a lot of information. This was the ladies' night, other than Neville. It was the ladies' night and Neville. Neville,
What's
you're
going
good?
on, Nev?
I'm
What's
here.
going on?
What's that, Cindy?
I said, what's going on, Neville?
Not much. In pistachios now.
Cool. Well, this is recorded, so I'm going to send this out as a recording. If people want to look at it or share it with somebody else, feel free.
Thank you.
Thank you.